Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our panelists and participants of this first part of the session here today. My name is Gino van Begin. I'm the Secretary General of ICLE, Local Governments for Sustainability, and it is a real pleasure for me to be part of this important conversation on urban water resilience and the critical partnerships that are needed to help delivering on effective policy around water. Climate change is fundamentally changing the hydrological cycle and our relationship to water worldwide. We are experiencing, all of us, more frequent and more severe extremes, intense precipitation, flooding or floods, and drought at the same time. Urban areas now sit on the front line of climate adaptation, making these extreme water and weather patterns becoming a difficulty to manage. For cities, it has become the new normal. Too often, there is too little, too much, or too dirty water. Urban water resilience depends on much more than city infrastructure alone. It requires stronger connections between the cities and the catchments that serve them. And through the entire cycle of urban water use, the water utilities play a vital role across this entire value chain. And to function effectively, utilities need to work more and hand in hand with the local governments and their administrations. We see that, unfortunately, in many cases, there is very limited engagement between the urban planning departments and the water utilities in cities, which often may lead to a misalignment between the urban demand and the water supply availability. Such disconnects may increase risk, cost, and efficiencies, and especially as climate change and climate pressures are mounting. So strengthening these institutional connections is essential for building a long-term water resilience in our view. At ICLE, we work with cities to strengthen these institutional connections through technical support, capacity building, exchange between cities to embed resilience into their planning processes. Equally important, we facilitate multi-stakeholder platforms that should support dialogues between and bringing together the city's water utilities, the private sector, and communities. So within this frame, we are very happy and honored to have a message that is provided by His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal of Jordan on the benefits of this cross-sector resilience. I would like to ask my colleagues to start the video message, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, given that the outcomes of this Congress will shape the roadmap for the 2026 United Nations Water Conference and guide the UN system-wide strategy in water and sanitation, I see a real opportunity to present a vision that takes policy above politics and shared prosperity above contention, and most importantly, anthropolicy over what I increasingly describe as necropolicy. The multi-deprivation index, the multi-harassment index. There are three themes before us. 1, innovation, 2, human rights, and 3, climate resilience. These are not abstract concepts, but questions of survival. Water remains the foundation of peace, health, and dignity. Yet, as we are painfully aware, 2.2 billion people still lack safe drinking water, and 3.5 billion live without sanitation. Your first theme at the Congress, Innovation in Water and Sanitation Management, is about turning the gap, the discrepancy, into opportunity. Here in Jordan's Azraq Basin, leaky dams were repaired using nature-based flood management to protect the only health center from destruction. Innovation, however, must also foster inclusion. The second theme, the human right to water and sanitation, reminds us that access to water is not a privilege, but an inalienable right across our region, which is under immense strain and in some cases under deliberate attack. The systematic destruction of water infrastructure is not collateral damage, it is ecocide. In Gaza, more than 90% of water infrastructure has been destroyed, leaving over 2 million people surviving on less than a fifth of the minimum safe standard. When water is weaponized, it undermines not only survival, but the very principles of human dignity and international law. Indeed, the weaponization and the politicization of our globe, the neglect and inequality that this brings, continues to strip people of the basic conditions of human security, including their right to safe water and sanitation. I don't want to dwell on the consequences of this neglect, but suffice it to say that what is visible today is that water insecurity costs developing countries up to 4% of GDP each year and threatens to displace 700 million people by 2030. It is said that 4 billionaires in the African continent represent the equivalent to more than 40% of the GDP of the whole of Africa. So, discrepancy, imbalance, injustice continues, and when we invest in water and sanitation, though we are investing in stability, where each dollar invested in water, sanitation, and hygiene, the WASH program, can generate up to a 21-fold return, and that is in the words of the World Bank. Our third theme, climate change, climate action, and resilience, brings all these dimensions together. I want to thank the Islamic Network in WADEM on water resources and development and management for bringing together a nexus of water, energy, food, and environment. I want to thank Blue Peace. I remember the early days in Montreux in 2010, and finally the Geneva Water Hub, as a commitment to what may one day be a major spin-off of all this activity. Europe has coal and steel to look back at as a foundation in the 50s. Can our Levant region, and indeed our Arab region, look forward to the creation of a water and energy community? The future is in your hands. Thank you very much indeed for listening to me.
Thank you very much, His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talan, for this very strong message that I think is very appropriate today, given also the, indeed, as the Prince referred to, the overall political situation and crises that we are having globally currently going on. Thank you very much. I would now like to turn to Mrs. Maaike van Ginneken, who is the water envoy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And Maaike is joining us live online. Can I ask to connect us with Mrs. van Ginneken, please?
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam. Thank you very much for joining us here in Bonn at the WOPA conference. And thank you very much for making the time to speak to us today. In the discussion that we are going to have today, which also started yesterday, the issues around climate, water resilience are of high importance on the agenda, not only in this conference, but also globally. And as we are moving towards the COP30 very soon, in 2 weeks' time in Brazil, and where nations have to put forward their new NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, and new national adaptation plans, we would be interested to know from you, as the water envoy of the Netherlands, how you think national climate plans can actually better integrate water and sanitation, and especially also utilities, to meet the rising urban demands that we are seeing globally. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be electronically with you at the WOPA Congress. I'm a big fan of water operators partnerships, and I'm sorry I cannot be there in person. It's good to remind ourselves that ordinary citizens feel the effects of climate change through water, because their taps run down, because their kids go thirsty, or for farmers, there's not enough water to get a good harvest. So water is often how climate change manifests itself, and we need to make sure that water is no longer the problem, but water is the solution. And I think we also need to remind ourselves that climate change is now. We've often talked about climate adaptation as something to be planned for in the future. But as I travel around the world, I see rainfall patterns change, I see more droughts, I see more floods, and I see utilities actually having to address climate adaptation and climate mitigation. In the COP in Belém, we're going to discuss a number of issues. One of the things are the indicators of the global goal and adaptation, but we're also going to look at the planning cycle of the National Determined Contributions, or NDCs, and the National Adaptation Plan, the NAPs. And I think, as you've already said, it's very important that utilities actually take part in this national planning process for a number of reasons. Indeed, to make sure that their water demands can also be fulfilled in the future. I think, secondly, because water utilities need to be aware of their environment and the actions that are being taken in the basins where they work that have an impact on their water supply. Of course, also through wastewater treatment and through water quality, utilities interact with their environment. And I think national adaptation plans and NDCs are national plans which often also look at spatial planning. We need to realize that with climate change, not everything is possible everywhere anymore. And utilities might have to think in the future to change their sources of water. For instance, in my country, in the Netherlands, many utilities are shifting from groundwater resources to surface water resources, as we see that groundwater will be needed for other uses, and there's a lot of saltwater intrusions. So I will be at the COP, I will talk about water, and I will see many of you there. Let me wrap up by saying that you can count on the Netherlands to keep working with you as a champion for water and sanitation worldwide. We're very happy to work with WOPA and with many of the actors in the room there, and we will keep sharing our knowledge and expertise. And we will keep pushing for international water and climate action. Water is at the heart of climate change. Let's make sure the water voice is heard at the COP, but let's also make sure that we play our role and really understand what other actors need to do in terms of climate adaptation, climate resilience, and climate mitigation as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam van Ginneken. Greetings to the Netherlands, and see you soon in Belém. Thank you very much, Madam. I would now like to move to Mr. Marek Engel, who is the Director General of the Institute for Environmental Policy at the Ministry of Environment of the Slovak Republic, and perhaps also following up on what we just heard from our colleague in the Netherlands. Mr. Engel, how do you see opportunities, possibilities, potential for national governments to indeed create better enabling conditions for utilities to build climate water resilience domestically, as also Mrs. van Ginneken just said. So can maybe you share with us how the Slovak Republic intends to work on those issues? Ms. Engel, the floor is yours.
Oh, good. Excellencies, colleagues, and dear friends, it's good morning. My gratitude goes to our international partners in the UN for this opportunity, and I'm here in place of the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Environment of the Slovak Republic, Tomáš Taraba, and I would like to extend his warm regards to all of you and also our determination to working with the UN Habitat on establishing our regional hub in Bratislava. I believe it will be a success story. I'd like to offer a number of reflections as a policy advisor, as an analyst that we have gathered over those years at work. First of all, let me think about the significance of water, because wherever there is water, there is life, and it truly resembles the blood flowing through our veins. Slovakia, my country, is blessed with abundance of high-quality water, and we mean to keep it that way. Of course, there are risks to that prosperity, including those stemming from climate change and pollution, but we're acting on it. And protection of water is enshrined in the nation's constitution, which stipulates that water resources are strategic property of the country. And in line with that, the government has taken decisive steps to avoid any instances of potential speculation with utilities ownership, and this ownership is limited to public only. This is the cornerstone and backbone of our policy. And now to those recommendations. Because when I was preparing for this session, I had like 120 ideas. I had to narrow them down to a number of them, the most in general. And I will start with those on funding. I'm saying that as someone who majored in national economy and finance, but public funding makes perfect economic sense in this case, and let me explain why. We have heard this figure 21-to-1 ratio repeatedly yesterday and today, but these benefits are often social and environmental in nature, and therefore they are hard to embed in the price. And private operators will never fully benefit from them because they do not enter their balance sheets, and they do not necessarily generate income, but they create prosperity for the society, and this is crucial. With this in mind, there are incentives to mobilize private capital may be limited. However, savings from improvement in public health, that's the 21-to-1 ratio, can be used to finance further development of water infrastructure, because not only it is a human right, it is a public interest to provide clean water and reliable sanitation. And in this sense, I would urge public sector and governments and also international institutions such as development banks to provide funding to increase access. Number two, do not hesitate to use different kinds of environmental revenue to expand and level up your infrastructure. Again, let me tell you why. As outlined with regard to this panel, we rightfully expect our infrastructure to not only deliver on basic human needs to water, but also to aid us in our climate policy efforts and other environmental domains. Water infrastructure plays a key role in climate change adaptation, and therefore utilization of, for instance, carbon tax revenue is fully justified because improved Wastewater treatment, for instance, improves or reduces GHG emissions, thus delivering on a number of environmental goals at once. Number 3, there has been an ongoing debate about quaternary wastewater treatment, which means to remove micropollutants, including potentially forever chemicals. I'd like to stress that this is a public health emergency because some of these substances have been found in newborns, and there is only one way how they could have gotten there. And my suggestion would be to develop a fair scheme to go beyond and further protect our most precious asset, which is public health. During this debate, the European Union has felt recoil coming from manufacturers regarding underestimated costs of the system's introduction and its inherent unfairness, I'm quoting, meaning it is not sufficiently targeted and fit for purpose. But what is promising is that it appears that the idea of an EPR scheme may be acceptable to manufacturers as long as all polluters pay their fair share, and this is in line with the polluter paid principle. So my suggestion would be to craft your regulation in order to make everyone pay their fair share to deal with this public health crisis. Now, moving on to better policy and enablers. Number 1, safeguard the most vulnerable, and I can't stress this enough. Social tariffs represent our commitment to solidarity and humanity. Our own domestic research suggests that around 10% of the population are in need of social tariffs to maintain a manageable share of total household expenditure going towards water so as not to exceed a certain threshold that would potentially endanger their livelihoods. The rest, however, can do sufficiently well on their own, which of course may differ from one country to another, so always be mindful of who you need to reach out to and who to help. Speaking from experience, welfare for all policy has led to artificial under-maintenance and indebtedness of certain operators. This has happened in our country. And I would argue against this practice because the population in the short run could lose access because it is harder to step in as a last resort supplier for technical and logistical reasons. So always, you try not to get to this point, instead protect those who need it. That would be my suggestion. My personal favorite, regulate in a sound manner to ensure long-term predictability and economic stability. We expect our utilities to expand access, develop and maintain their infrastructure, whilst also constantly improving their services, which is totally fair. Let me say it again, that's totally fair. However, from their point of view, there can be no robust planning in the long run in a constantly shifting environment, and policy changes can distort long-term planning. I think you could agree with that. So my suggestion would be to craft your policy, your regulation in one piece, identifying everything that could go wrong with incentives of all stakeholders, because you know the Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong in the end. To avoid having to overhaul your regulation again and again and again, only to find new mistakes that regulations may have messed up with. Try not to get there. And cost recovery can and should be ensured through price regulation. Operational as well as capital costs need to be accounted for, or else the infrastructure will degrade and crumble. We have learned that it is actually much easier to build something than to provide upkeep and make it thrive over time. Humanity has been doing this for millennia. The way I see it, maintenance needs to be properly reflected in the price-making mechanism to incentivize necessary rather than excessive undertakings. And I would strongly suggest to employ the Build Back Better principle to seize the opportunity and improve climate resilience and environmental performance with every step on the way. And the last one, I would suggest to assume higher priority to urban and landscape planning. This is crucial in climate change adaptation. Forget the one-size-fits-all lunacy and work with local communities to satisfy their specific needs in a cost-effective fashion. Developing municipal capacity is a great investment. It enhances their ability to identify most suitable solutions for them. Those could be larger clusters fit for, dense pipe coverage, or small decentralized facilities such as root wastewater treatment plants or other innovative technologies. And I believe that integration of urban and landscape planning will also strengthen water retention capacity of cities, which is crucial to adaptation, and infrastructure longevity. Your Excellencies and colleagues, this is not an exhaustive list, but I believe these ideas represent a backbone of a sound long-term policy focusing on sustainable human development. And with that, I yield the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Engel, for these very good and concrete suggestions of how to move on, building upon the capacities that utilities have, trying to create those enabling conditions according to the suggestions you just made. And thank you also very much for emphasizing the need of the multi-level cooperation, collaboration that is needed, especially with local communities or local governments domestically in our nations. And with that, I would like to actually move to our last speaker here in the panel, Mrs. Ingrid Gabriele Hofen, who is the managing director of the GIZ, the agency, the German Agency for International Cooperation. And Ms. Hofen, the GIZ is working, has endorsed world water operator partnerships now for a number of years through very particular projects, as well as with a larger view towards pushing and stimulating those partnerships. So we would be very happy to learn more from you of how within the GIZ what you can do, what you tried also to do to embed the WOP approach into the larger climate resilience programs and perhaps also WASH. So maybe also beyond just the standalone projects that you are and the agency working on. So if you can give us perhaps a little bit more of a context of how you think you can push further the entire activities under the GWOPA. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gino, and many thanks for having me here at this GWOPA Congress. And we started already yesterday in exchanging actually experiences about the value added, the USP of this partnership, and especially about WOPs as such. Perhaps let me start a bit from the strategic level, and then I'll look into the future. His Highness, but also Maaike van Ginneken, and also you, Marek, you have actually described what kind of challenges we are now facing. So this was different when we started to work on water operating partnerships. Nowadays, actually, due to climate change, we should say a climate crisis that we are facing in many countries. Jordan has been named already, but I recently visited Lebanon, where actually due to water scarcity, there are conflicts between municipalities at the local level, between people, because they want to secure access. Water is life, but in some cases, water is also business. So there are possibly also conflicting utilizations, and one has to make sure that sufficient water is being served to people. This is a human right. And to be inclusive and actually also shaping a water provision system so that nobody's been left behind, that the prices are fair, and they also take into consideration the utilization. So those that use more water possibly also have a higher, it's for them more affordable to use more water. So in view of this climate crisis, I think the challenge that WOPs are facing nowadays is different, but WOPs are also an opportunity. What is different from what we have seen a decade ago? The climate crisis actually brings a lot of uncertainty. You see new patterns of rain, you see scarcity of water where you haven't expected it. And how do you deal with that? And I think that WOPs can actually help to exchange lessons learned, to exchange knowledge about new technology, and also to reconfirm to water utilities what is doable and what pays off. So for instance, we are working in Jordan on wastewater management. which now becomes really a priority. And you can see that overall this pays off in terms of efficiency, economic gains, and more water availability for all sectors of the economy. So those digital tools, for instance, that we have introduced in Jordan, they could also be very instrumental for neighboring countries or for North Africa or for Africa as such. And what we can do through WOPs is that actually we can distribute knowledge, new technologies in a higher speed, and also make sure that different water utilities, that they are not alone. By partnering, they can gain additional support, additional knowledge, and reshape their answers to this increasing climate crisis. So for the future, I think, well, first, and I hope that actually the COP in Belém is going to reassure this. For us, coming from a sector or an area where we have been working with many emerging economies for many, many years, we know that water scarcity has been growing. You can see this when you look into Cote d'Ivoire, the cocoa production. We have new evidence on the Amazon and droughts that are happening there. And we all know from science what that is going to mean globally for all of us in each and every country. It's not going, we can't actually avoid in each and every country not to deal with water scarcity. So I hope that actually Belém, and then the forthcoming year with the Water Congress in 2026, with the big conference, that water gets the attention that it really deserves, because it's absolutely crucial. Many people nowadays speak about the scarcities of raw materials coming from specific destinations. I think the scarcity of water is going to be faced by all of us. And it's for sure, and we have sufficient evidence in place. Either we have too much water or we have too less water. So both phenomena are very important. So I first hope, and certainly GIZ with its experience in this field, and we have a huge portfolio in many, many countries we are operating in, that we hope that we can actually bring our knowledge to this new process, that water really gets the attention that it merits, that we come to very concrete and firm commitments, how water is going to be factored into the climate process. Maaike van Ginschen have given a couple of hints, which I consider absolutely essential to be part of an adaptation goal with concrete criteria, which would incentivize actually more analytical work in each and every country on water issues. If you compare what we have invested now for more than 30 years to measure CO2 emissions and to make sure that the energy sector responds to it, when you compare this to the knowledge that is available in each and every country on water issues, it's a fraction of what we have invested so far on the mitigation side. So more analytical work, more knowledge, more data in place, and better monitoring system are absolutely crucial to take the right decision on investments in the future in the water sector and sanitation sector as well. And we are going to mobilize support in this direction. Secondly, and there comes again the water operating partnership in place. We firmly believe, as water is such a crucial cross-cutting issue for societies and economies, you need partnership, multi-stakeholder dialogues, and it's not an issue that you can treat with in silos. You have really make sure that you work cross-sectoral, that you embed actually water utilities and water operations in a broader spectrum of activities that have to happen. You mentioned, Gino, in your opening remarks, watershed management, urban planning, you as well, Mark. So these are absolutely crucial areas that we have to pay more attention to. Unless we do so, we won't solve the water problem. It can't be solved by a very siloed water sector by itself. It has to be done in a cross-structural way, and other sectors like agriculture, like the economy as such, have to work towards a higher water resilience that serve people at large. And this is certainly a second part that we are going to bear in mind when we approach 2026, to make sure that the new process is sufficiently inclusive. It brings into the conferences the knowledge from the private sector, but also the voice of civil society. And this, I think, in this respect, also WOPs can be very instrumental. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hofen, for that strong message. And I think that is what we have heard throughout the various interventions of our panelists here today or this morning. Something that reinforces just a simple truth, that we need for water resilience to become effective and successful, we need to do so by building the connections, by setting up the collaborations, the analytical and knowledge exchange that is required. And this, as we heard also here, amongst the sectors and the levels of government, be it also public and private sector, be it national government and local government or subnational government, and obviously between utilities and planners or other administration and departments on site. The climate pressures are definitely, and I hope that Belém will provide some actions forward, but climate pressures nonetheless will intensify, and we cannot, I believe, as you said also, Ms. Hofen, afford actually for the water resilience or any of the other crises that we have to continue to work in silos. We must find ways of enhancing our collaboration, coordination, and shared responsibilities in these areas. We at ICLE, as a network of 2,500 plus local and regional governments, especially when it comes to the WOPs and to the water operator partnerships, we are looking very much towards helping here cities to make that link in their jurisdictions between utilities, private sector, and the local governments to help creating that spirit and effectiveness around climate resilience to actually act faster and better in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you for, once again, an applause to all our speakers here this morning. Thank you so much for having been with us here. And with that, I would like to give the floor now to my colleague, Rose Gratwa, who is from Uganda and is the chair of the GWOPA Assembly, to moderate and facilitate the next session. In the meanwhile, thank you again, and we can leave the stage. Thank you. Sorry, we have a picture opportunity.
That's okay.
I forgot to tell. Sorry.
Let's take the plenary as well, the second group. So that's one photo. Thank you very much. I would like to ask my panelists to come up. We have Ms. Rose Molohane from South Africa, grassroots activist, non-voice in South Africa and beyond, and my namesake, Mr. Mutsumi, 25 years experience, and we'll get to hear more about that. Mr. Animish Kumar, who has wealth in experience in Africa and Asia Pacific in the UN. Mr. Arjun, who has 40 years experience wearing very many hats until his hair went off. And last but not least, Mr. Long Naro, who has transformed the Cambodia water sector. Ladies and gentlemen, we are running a bit behind time, but I'm sure we'll be able to catch up. This morning, we're going to have a very interesting panel to see, as we have discussed, that many utilities and around the world are on the front line of the climate crisis, and we've heard a lot about that in the first session. But we feel that utilities are also uniquely positioned to be part of the solution, leading adaptation, driving innovation, and building resilience from the ground up. So we'll explore how utilities can move from vulnerability to leadership. I'd like to invite you to listen, to reflect, and at the end of the day, see which ideas we can exchange to help us turn the tide from climate risk to climate resilience, and going back to what we heard yesterday for the communities and the people that we serve. So I'll start with my namesake because, I mean, we share names, so obviously, and being the lady there, I'll start with you. You've done a lot of work in vulnerable communities. From your experience, because I believe you have a lot compared to many of us, what are the most urgent water and sanitation vulnerability communities face as climate impacts intensify? We are seeing droughts, we are seeing floods. How is that affecting the vulnerable communities? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rose. Vulnerability. We talk of water scarcity because of climate change right now. But for us at the community level, it has been happening for many years. In some of our communities, the municipalities will decide to put connection of taps of water, but the taps will be there without water. So now, when we talk about water scarcity that is affected by climate change, I think we should think deeper on how we are going to be addressing this kind of issue. At our community, within SDI, where we operate in 32 countries, water, we call it life, but we are lifeless because we don't have water. Right now, when I was coming to Germany, initially I was in Italy some few days ago, I was saying, how much should I calculate so that I can be able to buy a bottle of water? Whilst we are saying water is life, poor people has to buy water, and they don't have money to do that. So I'm asking a question. If we say we have to act swiftly and quickly, what are the main issues that we are going to be addressing? Because there's a very big gap between communities, municipalities, and national governments. When I look at our countries, especially in Africa, sometimes when I visit our countries through exchange programs of SDI and realize that a lot of money should be spent in paying for water, paying to use the sanitation unit. And the poor people don't have money to do that. And now we are saying we have to include communities to discuss the issues that are affecting them, especially with the issue of climate change. Yes, we are being affected by the floods. Our houses are being flooded, and we don't have money to repair our houses, or we don't even have alternative place where we can stay in order for us to get a better house. Climate change is affecting all of us, but the rich can afford to address it. The poor will become more poorer because of vulnerability. So I'm trying to raise the issue of the difference between the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. I see most of the international institute, they are supporting humanitarian aid. And it tends to be like we are becoming beggars rather than becoming partners who should address the issues adequately. So what I'm trying to raise here is that the money that is being used for humanitarian, why can't you bring it to us to address the issues that are affecting us on a daily basis? Because if you bring food for that time, when you go out, how am I going to survive? But what I'm trying to do at my community level, support me to continue to do it, rather than teach me how to fish, rather than to fish for me. Because if I know how to fish, your money that you give to me, I will know how to use it. But for now, the partnership that we are talking about between municipalities and communities is not working better for the people, especially those who are vulnerable and very much organized. When I look at my country, South Africa, the maintenance of infrastructure is not happening at all, whereby in some of the communities you'll find that the sewer is mixed with water. And then we are talking about the government that is taking care of their people. Today I'm attending this conference for the first time, the GOPA conference. I didn't know what I was going to talk about, but I was saying, but I need water, I don't want to buy water. Because water comes from heaven or from hell, I don't know where it comes from, but it belongs to all of us. Why should I buy water? I have to get water for my communities. We have to work together to maintain the infrastructure. Sanitation is another thing. The sewer is spilling all over the communities where we stay. We strive a lot to address this issue, but it's so difficult. The policies that our government is coming up with, they are so beautiful. They're like a woman who needs to get married, but there's no man who's proposing love to that woman. So I'm trying to say, let's come up with the policies that are people-centered. Let's agree to listen to the people. I think our government has got a problem of listening. When the people talk, they are not being listened to. But when the policies are drafted, they are drafted for the people, and they are not drafted by the people. So if we talk of inclusive development, even the United Nations or UN Habitat, it's always talking about inclusive development. Who are you including? If you talk about me without me, nothing for me without me. I would like us to join hands together from today and say SDI is a very big organization, an international organization with lots of problems and lots of solutions to the problems. The only thing is the northern countries that give money to the southern countries to consider the importance of also supporting SDI, because we have stood up and say we are sick and tired of being told how to do it. We want to do it together. I would like to emphasize that the partnership that we are talking about today, Rose, it should be a practical and implementable partnership. I've been attending all these conferences, and all these people that are talking, we have to work together. We have to include. We have to create partnership. We have to have good policies. Are they working on the ground? No. They are just being talked around, but they are not implemented properly on the ground. So
Thank
the
you.
climate change is affecting all of us. Can
Thank you.
somebody stand up and say, I am GIZ, I will work with you, Sheikh Dwellers International, I will join hands with you. Or those who volunteer to join hands with me so that I can go back and tell my other country colleagues that we did have a practical partnership where we have to write down an agreement on how we are going to work together.
Thank you,
because
Rose.
talking and
Yeah.
not agreeing is terrible.
I
Let's work
agree.
together.
I agree. I
Thank
think
you
a
very
round of
much,
applause
Rose.
for my namesake, who has spoken very passionately. One thing she said is that she doesn't want to buy water. I come from the operator part, so definitely we also say water is not free. We need to look at how we can make it more equitable and design services that are climate resilient. Rose, I just wanted to pick one thing back to you, because you said you're tired of talk. What practical, and you brought in the word practical. So from your point of view, give us just 2 things utilities can do to work with the communities to design the services that are equitable and climate resilient.
I think we should come up with people-centered policies. Let's create the partnership that will be actionable. Let's create a financial model that will support the implementation of those policies. Let's create structures that are formalized, institutionalized, the structures that will include the people, especially those that are organized and have got the relevant agenda that addresses climate change issues.
Thank you very much. Now we want to move to Mr. Motsi. We've talked about policies, integrating utilities into climate policy. So water is central to climate impacts, but often missing from the national climate plans. Why must water and sanitation be explicitly included in commitments like what we've had in the previous session, the NDCs and the NAPs?
Thank you very much, moderator, and greetings to everyone. A lot has already been said on the critical significance of water and the connection with climate change. And in fact, to an ordinary person or a bystander, we see water or the impacts of climate change manifest in water, as was already said earlier by the envoy of the government of the Netherlands. We see it by too much water or too little water. But it actually goes more complex than that. For example, this year, we do hold what we call the Global National Adaptation Planning Expo, and we had the NAP Expo in Zambia. The Southern Africa region had experienced a drought since 2024, and many of you would know that. And the drought that Zambia had experienced, the government elaborated on how it has manifested in many of their systems. It shrank harvests. It slowed down the industry in the country. It also slowed down the hydropower plants and hydropower generation, triggering a lot of power cuts that even up to today, Zambia, for the first time, they had a lot of huge power cuts that you don't have power for a whole day, and even sometimes longer. It pushed up food prices. So this is what second order impacts look like. So it's not only not having water, just merely like that, but it transcends and cascades into many other areas. And it reminds us that actually resilience or building resilience in water will not only secure water, but it secures all essential services, all essential needs that we need. It secures water, it secures energy, secures livelihoods, secures access to education and access to everything. So coming to the question in terms of why we need to have water included in planning or implementing adaptation actions. In fact, I want to just highlight that water and sanitation themselves have long been recognized as a top priority in the national adaptation plans, in the NDCs. In fact, we will release two synthesis reports, actually 3 synthesis reports this year. The National Adaptation Plan synthesis report, progress report is already out, and the NDC synthesis report is also coming out very soon. They show that actually agriculture and food security are the topmost, but just immediately after that, then we have water and sanitation following these. Yet, despite all this recognition, the water utilities and water government, I think that's where the problem is. It's not necessarily in the planning side. In the planning, we do have water reflected in these plans. But these plans also, when it comes to the actions, or even in the planning, the water utilities themselves and the operators, the government, the local governments, rarely appear explicitly in the core design of these plans, and hence the implementation. They remain just simply implementers, but they are not the shapers on what should be done. Because when we do need to implement actions to respond to climate change risks, to address droughts or face droughts, we look up to the utilities or we look up to the operators. But then if they are not explicitly in these plans, then that's where we have the problem. And in fact, when we have the droughts or too much water or too little water, we rely on them for diversified sources, for instance. How do we get water in diversified sources? How do we address leakages, for instance, in the supply? How do we manage droughts? And also in climate change, in also managing mitigation co-benefits, because it's not only adaptation. When we look at the water supply and distribution systems, we're looking at water energy efficient pumps, for instance. And also water is critical for renewable energy, hydropower energy. And then methane capture from sludge, for instance, and many others. And in terms of policy coherence, like as I have just elaborated, water is not just water, as in mere water we drink. Water is health, water is food, water is everything. And we need the operators, we need the implementers to be part of that coherence design that would help build better systems. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Motsi. I wanted to ask, just looking around, how many are from utilities? Show of hands. How many have climate change resilient experts in their utilities? Maybe you just stand, give you some exercise. Please do stand, those who have. South Africa, big Africa. United Arab Emirates. Pakistan, which is under the sea level. Italy. From that side? South Africa, we already talked to South Africa, and sit down. Yes? Spain, and the rest of us. So, back to you. How should utilities and local governments engage within this process? Because this word NDCs and NAPs, I had to look it up very fast, wondering what are these, national action plans, or yeah? So how? Back to Rose, practical.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very important question, actually, that you're asking. And I like also in the morning that there was also, I mean, earlier in the conversation, in the talks, there was also the indication that as we go to COP, and I like what also the managing director of GIZ also said, that we're looking forward to what is going to happen as we move to the future in the climate regime, and moving forward on how do we put water in the center stage. In Belém, for instance, we will have, under the Global Goal on Adaptation, adopting indicators for the global climate resilience, UAE Belém work program on indicators. And why these are also important is because they help to translate the resilience into measurable progress, such as the share of water and sanitation infrastructure that is climate-proofed, or proportion of population using safely managed climate resilient services. Right now, the example you just did now, to ask the operators on how many of them do have resilience personnel in their portfolio is also an important indicator there in terms of whether we are moving into a direction where we'll address these issues. The indicators also would help to unlock resources. We very well know that in order to invest, and this is how the world we have built it in the way we have built it today, in order to invest in any way, in any area, we need evidence base and we need indicators in terms of whether our investments are going to result into the revenue that we need. And the indicators are all exactly going to do that. So we are trying to build a system that is going to also create confidence for the investors to be able to come in and be able to work in climate proofing the systems that we have. Some draft indicators that we also have on the table, even bridge adaptation and mitigation areas, as I was mentioning earlier on. So then, how would the utilities and local governments engage in this process? We see a few things, or a few areas. Firstly, utilities and municipalities should help co-design the national commitments. As I was indicating, we don't see them being very much reflected when we look at the NDCs and the national adaptation plans. How do we ensure that the utilities also at the national level, you are part of the shapers and the design of the actions that need to be done? Because otherwise, then we remain with high-level actions that we just assume that we are going to maybe build barriers in terms of too much water and maybe get other alternative sources of water in case of water stress. But the utilities can't come with the technologies, with actually the right measures that need to be done. How do we get them together into the design? So that we can also help to convert these globally agreed targets. I just mentioned the global goal on adaptation. Then how can the utilities come now and help us now then convert those targets that we set at the global level, including the indicators, to convert them to national specific targets that then would be achieved at the national level, and then be integrated into the national adaptation plans and the NDCs, and identify the priority actions that need to be taken. So secondly, is
Quickly.
to, okay.
Summarize.
Yeah, secondly is to build a data pipeline for utilities and environment ministries to ensure real-time reporting for adaptation and emissions. As I was talking about their role and significance in data, we now talk about satellite imagery, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. We need utilities to be able to help in that and to pilot the GGA. But finally, one of the other points that I wanted to raise is to help connect to finance. How can the utilities help to bundle the dual benefit projects, like leak reduction, solar pumping, sludge to energy, nature-based flood protection, for instance. And it is the operators and utilities that will be able to come and create these kind of projects that would be able to address the core issues more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you guys are picking some nuggets. He talked about converting the global indicators to the national and utility level. And I'm just wondering, were these people involved in setting those indicators? But I want to move to Mr. Kumar. How does Water help translate policy coherence into implementation? And can you provide recent developments on how we can scale up the action?
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot has been said already, so I'll try to focus straight into the world of resilience. In particular, I represent the community of disaster risk reduction. So my organization, the UNDRR, is the focal point for disaster risk reduction in the UN system. And we all know that water-related disasters constitute 90% of all disasters, and that's a starting point for us to understand. We already talked about and heard about the excess and deficit of water leading to majority of these disasters. Now, where we are as of now, one side of the world is the risk becoming more and more complex thanks to climate change. Unconventional disasters happening at places which the people are not prepared to manage those disasters, and the frequency, intensity, and the magnitude of events are increasing, becoming more complex, and having more impact. We do have some things to celebrate, although. Over the last 20 years, the global disaster-related mortality has declined by half. So 50% of people are dying of disasters compared to how it used to be over decade-to-decade average over the last 20, 25 years. During the same period, the number of people getting affected because of disasters has increased by 70%. So lethality of disasters declining, but the impact on the populations is increasing. And where it really becomes more concrete is in terms of the economic losses. Official estimated as reported by the governments is around $200 billion a year. When we then aggregate the indirect losses, the flow of losses, ecosystem losses, and so on, it then touches $2.3 trillion in a given year. That's the magnitude we are talking about. Now, to the policy response to all of these is often becoming more robust, but also at the same time, we are challenged by the fragmentation within the policy space. Just to give an example, officially reported, 137 countries in the world have reported disaster risk reduction plans. 67 countries in the world have reported national adaptation plans. Now, if you look at the risk from a risk lens, adaptation from a medium to long-term risk management and disaster risk reduction from short to medium-term risk management aren't very different if you look from the temporal point of view. But then the national adaptation plans and disaster risk reduction plans are often implemented by two different ministries in the same country. But the activities that they implement are not very different. You pick up water-related any activity, for an example, and you will see that water is widely configured in National Adaptation Plan, but also in the disaster risk reduction plans. Two different ministries looking for two different resources for often the same activity in the same country, and we keep talking about limited resources. So while we're talking about limited resources, we are fragmenting it further. We will be launching a report at the COP called Global Status of Comprehensive Risk Management. And we have looked into those 45 countries between these 67 with NAPs and 137 with disaster risk reduction plans. There are 45 countries which have both. And we're trying to see how are these countries working. And we have some good practices. We already heard Pakistan perhaps was one of the countries that stood up just now when Rose, you asked about how is it working. It's a good practice country actually, where the water use efficiency under NAPs is being complemented by infrastructure resilience under disaster risk reduction plan. That's one good example. Peru is another good example, where again, the supply of water, taking climate change into account, is being complemented by infrastructure and critical infrastructure supply and disruption control. So there are some good examples, but those are very few. And we really need to ensure that we start talking about coherent implementation. But the question is how? How do we practically do it? I think the first step is to do it is to look for common data. Often whenever we implement a project in a country, the first step a project implementer does is to start collecting data, when a lot of data already exists in that country. At the Water Summit, New York Water Climate Conference a couple of years back, UNDRR made a commitment that by 2028, we will cover all water-related disaster accounting system in 100 countries. We have already established this in 113 countries so far through a system called Delta Resilience. It's a tracking system for loss and damage and hazardous events, and we are focusing on water-related disasters in majority of these countries. Almost majority, I would say, if not all, are developing countries, which we are supporting through these mechanisms. And we believe that if multiple actors in a country start using the same database, coordination in implementation becomes much more automated than being infused through policy coherence exercises. The second part I feel we should definitely do is to turn these into coherent planning. I already mentioned about comprehensive risk management. If we all have a shared understanding of risk, aligning the continuum of short to medium-term risk management through disaster risk management and medium to long-term risk management through adaptation plan, we're talking about a continuum of plan. Then do we really need two completely isolated plans in the same country, or do we need to align them better? The Pacific countries are shining examples. Joint National Action Plan, 13 countries, one country, one plan. So can we replicate these good practices in other countries? Where are we heading towards in terms of some recent developments, which I would like to share, which might be some good news to all of you? In the domain of climate action itself, we recognize that capacity to do all of these is very limited in the countries. And at the same time, while some new funding mechanisms are coming up, the absorptive capacity of institutions and communities is also very limited. There comes technical assistance to countries. So I would like to share a good example. Santiago Network on Loss and Damage is something UNDRR co-hosts with UNOPS. It's a triple C Paris Agreement mechanism. It provides technical assistance to countries on any matter relevant to loss and damage. And this could mean resilience building, including for water sector. The beauty of this system is that it is demand-driven, so anybody in any country, including community-based organizations, can seek support from Santiago Network. And the support is provided by those who have it, those who have the capacity. But to do so, you're also being provided funding to the countries. So that's a good mechanism where marketplace functions between demand and supply is being met. We will be hearing at COP30 the announcement of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage in terms of ensuring the call to expressions of interest to seek support. Now, Santiago Network has pledges exceeding $40 million. The FRLD has pledges exceeding $700 million. Are we ready to manage all these funding? And hence, it's very important to look into our own capacity. I would end by talking about early warnings for all. It's such a practical tool. An early warning for 24 hours of notice for communities saves the cost of response and recovery by 30%. We will be launching our 4th edition of the Global Status Report on Early Warning Systems at the COP. It's part of a novel initiative called Early Warnings for All that we co-lead with the World Meteorological Organization and other implementing partners. And we have found some very good traction here where countries are coming up and establishing mechanisms. And we did hear from the Dutch envoy earlier, Water at the Heart. That's actually the name of one of the projects as well within Early Warnings for All that is enhancing the access to early warning information services with a very specific focus as well on water-related disasters. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much for that. Again, more reports coming up. But before we discuss more about these reports, I'd like to move to Arjun. Climate resilience, water and sanitation systems, we all know require major investment. What are the most promising sources of financing? And what is preventing utilities and cities from accessing them?
Thank you, Rose. I'm going to be speaking at a slower pace than my much younger colleagues here.
Definitely.
I hope you don't
You're
mind.
excused.
Fun fact, Rose and I go back 10 years. We worked together on the UNESCO's Advisory Board for Water and Sanitation for Human Settlements. And Long Naro and I worked together for the last 30 years in the Phnom Penh Water Supply Authority and Cambodia more, generally speaking. So I'm very glad to have been resurrected from an ancient past and brought here by WOPA, accompanying, of course, my boss, my floor, in water links. So that said, to go back to your question, Rose, there are numerous sources of funds. There are public funds, there are federal level, state level, local level. There are the IFIs, there are bilateral funding agencies, there are private funds. There are municipal financial instruments that can be exploited for developing climate resilience. But the question to be asked is, why are these funds not flowing to water and sanitation utilities? And I think we need to look a bit inwards and agree, at least that's my firm view, having seen a number of such situations over the last 30 years, that we are not efficient. If you're not efficient, you cannot attract resources. But there is a paradox here, and this is more than a paradox, it's probably a conundrum, because local governments are required, certainly in developing Asia, to be responsible for water and sanitation services. And they are loath to fund projects that would enable water and sanitation utilities to become efficient and effective. But that said, I think we in Waterlinks have seen over the last 15 years now, for example, that WOPs are a terrific instrument to get utilities to become efficient and therefore let them stand on their feet to be able to attract money from whatever sources. There are some issues. Attracting money from IFIs, for example, is is an option that is increasingly being resorted to. But the problem here is that it's fragmented, and it comes in at times when it not be necessary for a particular utility to be able to receive that kind of money. They have their capital development programs, efficiency improvement programs, and if these funds do not come in at times in a phased manner, then they are of very little use to the utilities. Funds from the federal government, such as in India's case, they have a very large pot of money for what they call urban rejuvenation and transformation. These funds have to be competed for, and when you're competing with energy, transport, waste management, and other urban services, water supply and sanitation gets short shrift because you're not as efficient as the others. Also, there is the problem of, it's a contested issue, the issue of tariffs. I mean, we've seen that over the years. All across developing Asia, for instance, tariffs are an issue, except perhaps where I live in Metro Manila, where water is at over $1 a cubic meter, and 99% coverage of the city of Metro Manila. But there's nobody on the streets screaming and saying that, look, this is too much. And I'm talking about informal settlements and slums, which constitute about 36% of the entire metropolis. They're happy because they get good service. It's 24/7, drink from tap, and sanitation services are good. So there is no element of mythology about unaffordable tariffs here. On the other hand, you look at cities like New Delhi, which is where I was born and raised, and you get water for about 3 or 4 hours a day, and you've got to spend a lot of money in putting it upstairs and having RO systems in your homes. So I think we need to move past this and make sure that our utilities are efficient so that they can attract monies that are available from a number of sources. Some are more difficult to access, clearly. I mean, all the climate funds that we have are not easy to access, and most utilities would need the help of either an IFI or their own federal governments to be able to access them. But in most cases, just simply getting efficient, moving up the scale, moving the needle towards higher levels of efficiency will allow utilities to have a much stronger voice when it comes to accessing the available resources.
Yes, Arjun, just going back onto partnerships. When we look at the issue of how we can create partnerships between utilities and financiers and developing partners to unlock the capacity and resources that are needed, are there any types of partnerships that could work best?
Well, I think the most important partnership is, certainly in Asia's context, I can't speak for other continents, but in Asia, certainly the most important partnership is between a local government and the utility. Mm-hmm. So, because they are the ones with whom the utilities have a contract, in a manner of speaking. I was very taken up by a point being made earlier by our colleagues that what is it that you can do in a utility to be able to relate better to your constituency? And I think having a contract with your consumers is an equally important addition to the utilities armory, if you like, in accessing resources. But a local government partnership is something which I don't think most utilities have really cultivated, and that is perhaps also, I'm very glad that ICLEI is here this morning, because there is a huge responsibility on the part of local governments to recognize that water and sanitation utilities are extremely important in terms of urban growth, and urban centers being the fulcrum of economic and industrial growth. So unless this partnership is cultivated, I think it is not realistic to expect utilities to depend on other partnerships. You can from time to time, and it is happening, but not happening at scale, to depend on IFIs, bilateral financiers, private sector, and so on. I mean, the private sector will certainly come in when they see that there is a satisfactory return on investment. I mean, they're profit-oriented, and that is why there is a problem, because in all of Asia's mostly, I mean, 98% of Asia's urban water and sanitation systems, they're all publicly managed and publicly funded. And there is very little expectation of private investment over there. And I would frankly agree with that because I think it is a public responsibility and therefore must be publicly managed, although it can be managed, like in the case of Cambodia and Phnom Penh, in a commercial setting. I mean, it is a business at the end of the day.
Thank you very much. I would like to move, a hand clap for Arjun. He spoke slowly, we could all follow, and I think we are still with the panel. We want to move to Cambodia. You are leaders in many things, but one of them is looking at the nature-based solutions as a way of dealing with the climate challenges that we are facing. What role do they play, and can you share a bit about what other utilities can take from the example of Cambodia?
Thank you very much. Before I start to present all the achievements that we have in our Phnom Penh Water Supply Authority, I would like to thank to UN Habitat, also WOPs, including our friend here. You know the word of nature-based solution. This is very good for me as a water utility because this is look like a step-by-step solution. That is the most important. So if you look into the climate change, for people to say what we did until today is based on that nature-based solution that we achieved until today with all cost recovery since 1997 until today. So we are now from 200,000 cubic meter per day to reach 1.2 million cubic meter per day with serve the population around 3.5 million people in the city of Phnom Penh. And you know that the Phnom Penh Water Supply Authority, Phnom Penh City, is located in the Mekong Delta. So therefore, related to flood and drought is always there for all the time. So therefore, for us to optimize the operation is the most important our people of the day. Because the level is raised 2 meter to 10 meter level. So it's different 8 meter to 10 meter. So therefore, if you don't have or select a right choice or system to operate, you will lose into also climate change because you have spent a lot of energy, you spend a lot of investment, you spend on operation in order to recover back. So therefore, step by step is our important. So therefore, like we start to introduce our what it called the participation to the climate change by looking into our water supply process to optimize as much as possible in order to let the operation to become less cost in time of operation. So therefore, we introduce a lot of equipment which are able to adjust the power consumption. We are putting and participate to the solar system because in Cambodia, especially in Phnom Penh City, the government is accepted to us to use 30% of the total energy usage as a solar system. So that is one of the part that we are now starting to do mostly for all of the treatment plant in the water supply in Phnom Penh in order to optimize. So since 2025 that we start to use efficiency equipment, variable speed pump in order to start to adjust the pump operate in according to the pressure. So by 2005, we have 40% energy spent in the total operation expenditure. So from that time until today, we are now dropped down from 40% to 20%. So that is a huge cost saving in time optimization of equipment. And also a part to participate into the climate change. So the next step for us now, what we are doing, we are collecting all the data, the real data, analyze the data, and monitoring the data and feedback into the real operation on site. So introducing SCADA system into our operation for controlling our leakage, controlling our pressure management, and controlling our water production in order that supply and demand should be managed each other. That is the most important. So therefore, I understand that, trust is important. Developing partner are there with us. So long that you are committed to do your job, so long that you show them how is your strategic plan in order to overcome for all the problems. So therefore, PPSA now is working with the different partners like AFD, World, JICA, EU, including World Bank, AFD, ADB, and other partners, in order, especially also now we come up with South Korean, EDCF, in order to look into strengthening, especially participate to the climate change. So that is the most important. And the last one, the most important for us is human resource development is the most important. Because if you create a lot of facility, create a lot of system, but if human resources are not are not able to operate the system, you will fall. So therefore, for me, in terms of water utility, with one utility that have been well known, so we have been prepare all this strategic planning in order to cover all of this problem, including also participation to the climate change. So we are working from now until year 2030, around, spend another 700 million in US dollar in order to make the water supply in Phnom Penh with 100% coverage by the year 2030. So that is that I can participate into the climate change meeting today.
Thank you very much. A big hand for Mr. Long. As we conclude, we have looked at the path to resilience, and I wanted to pick, just because it's the 6th GWOPA Congress, 6 take-homes from the audience, and you need to listen because I'm asking you to just give me one word. One word as a take-home for the path to resilience, and I would like to start with that side. I don't know if we have a mic, but if we don't, you can, yes, a moving mic. One word, we need 6.
Efficiency.
Efficiency. There's one here. The lady.
Adaptability.
Adaptability. Ladies outdoing the men.
SCADA.
SCADA.
Partnerships.
Partnerships.
Sustainability.
Sustainability. One to, the lady, one gentleman at least.
Participation.
Participation. Can we, and then one more?
Inclusivity.
In?
Inclusivity.
Inclusivity. Do you remember them? First one was? Efficiency. Second? Third? SCADA. Fourth? PPP. Partnerships. Fifth? Sustainability. And then? Can you give yourselves a big round of applause? Would like to thank our panelists, and I think they are still available for questions. A lot of passionate words have been spoken. One thing, 2 weeks, some people will be in Brazil. And we'll have about 6 reports. And I'm wondering who of you is going to read those reports? So back to the people presenting these reports, find a way. Utilities are busy serving people, no time to read. How will they get the information? Please, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much.